The world of Harmony Creek. The scent of sawdust, a familiar comfort, clung to Jacob's clothes and hair. Sunlight filtered through the high window of his carpentry shop, illuminated dancing motes in the air, each speck a testament to his industrious morning. His plane glided smoothly across a length of cherry wood, the rhythmic shh thunk, a soothing counterpoint to the quiet hum of the summer day. He admired the grain emerging beneath his touch, a rich, deep red that promised strength and beauty. This particular piece was destined to be the top of a hope chest, a gift for young Sarah Miller, recently betrothed. Jacob found profound satisfaction in his work, in transforming raw timber into objects of utility and grace. His hands, calloused and strong, moved with unpracticed ease, a silent conversation between man and material. Each joint he dovetailed, each panel he planed, was an act of devotion, a physical manifestation of his faith and his place within Harmony Creek. Later, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and rose, the Stoltzfus family gathered around the long pine table. The aroma of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread filled the air, mingling with the sweet scent of apple butter. Jacob sat beside his mother, the warmth of her presence a quiet anchor. His younger siblings, Samuel and Esther, giggled softly as their mother recounted a humorous anecdote from market day. Thomas Stoltzfus, Jacob's father, sat at the head of the table, his posture erect, his gaze sweeping over his family. His presence was a weighty one, a pillar of tradition and unwavering faith. "The Lord has blessed us with another day of bounty," Thomas intoned, his voice deep and resonant, as he began the evening prayer. Jacob bowed his head, the words a familiar balm, a reminder of their interconnectedness, their shared purpose. During the meal, Thomas spoke of the upcoming harvest, of the need for diligent hands and grateful hearts. He spoke too of the importance of maintaining the ordnung, of upholding their way of life against the encroachment of the English world. Jacob listened, as he always did, absorbing his father's words, internalizing their significance. He knew his place, understood his responsibilities. Yet, tonight, as his father spoke of the world beyond their fences, a faint, unbidden curiosity stirred within him, a fleeting shadow across the placid surface of his contentment. He pushed it down, focusing instead on the comforting warmth of the stew. The next morning, before the dew had fully evaporated from the fields, Jacob began preparing his buggy for the journey. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and blooming clover. He carefully loaded the hope chest, along with a stack of handcrafted wooden toys and a selection of sturdy kitchen chairs. The wheels of his buggy, freshly greased, creaked softly as he maneuvered it out of the barn. His mare, Betsy, neighed softly, eager for the morning exercise. This delivery was a routine journey, one he had made countless times to the edge of the English town of Havenwood. He would meet Mrs. Henderson at the old mill, exchange his goods for her payment, and return before noon. A simple, predictable rhythm. Yet, as he secured the last of the straps, a subtle shift in his usual calm settled over him. It wasn't anxiety exactly, more a quiet hum beneath the surface of his usual composure, a whisper of something unspoken. He ran a hand over Betsy's smooth coat, the familiar feel of her warm flank grounding him. His father emerged from the house, a stern expression on his face. "Remember your purpose, Jacob," Thomas said, his voice firm. "And do not be swayed by the distractions of their world. Return swiftly." Jacob met his father's gaze, a flicker of something unreadable in his own eyes. "I will, Dad," he replied, his voice steady, though a curious tremor resonated deep within him. He climbed into the buggy, taking up the reins. With a soft cluck to Betsy, he set off, the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves on the dirt road carrying him away from the familiar embrace of Harmony Creek, towards a world he knew little of, a world that was about to become less distant than he could ever imagine. The morning sun, now higher in the sky, cast long shadows before him, a silent harbinger of change. A glimpse beyond the fence, the familiar rhythmic clip-clop of his horse's hooves on the asphalt gave way to the crunch of gravel as Jacob guided the buggy up a winding lane. A sign, hand-painted with whimsical swirling letters, read, Willow Creek Studio, Sarah Miller Artist. He slowed, observing the property. Unlike the neat uniform farmhouses of Harmony Creek, this one was a vibrant patchwork of color. The old farmhouse, a sturdy brick structure, had a newly painted teal door that practically vibrated against the muted grey siding. A porch swing, strung with fairy lights even in the midday sun, swayed gently. Pots overflowed with petunias and geraniums, their blossoms a riot of pinks and purples, a stark contrast to the ordered rows of corn and tobacco he had left behind. He pulled the buggy to a stop near a freshly paved driveway, where a small, brightly coloured sedan sat. The back of the buggy held the intricately carved hope chest, a testament to weeks of meticulous work. As he dismounted, a young woman emerged from the teal door, shielding her eyes against the sun. Sarah Miller. She was taller than he'd imagined from her father's description, with a cascade of reddish-brown hair pulled back loosely. Her eyes, a striking hazel, widened slightly as they met his. She wore a paint-splattered denim apron over a flowy tunic, and a faint smell of turpentine and something floral wafted from her. "You must be Jacob," she said, her voice clear and melodic, a noticeable difference from the softer, more subdued tones of the Amish women he knew. "The chest is beautiful, truly. My father spoke highly of your work." Jacob nodded, a warm flush rising in his cheeks. "It is ready for placement," he managed, his voice rougher than he intended. He gestured towards the buggy. "Oh, wonderful! It's going in the sunroom," she replied, her enthusiasm infectious. "It's a bit heavy, I imagine. Can I help?" "It would be best if I carried it," Jacob stated, already moving to unstrap the chest. He was accustomed to handling heavy lumber and finished pieces alone. He lifted the chest, its polished cherry wood gleaming, and felt the familiar strain in his arms. He followed her around the side of the house, past a riot of sunflowers reaching for the sky, to a sun-drenched room with large windows overlooking a sprawling garden. The room was filled with easels, half-finished canvases depicting landscapes and portraits, and tubes of paint scattered across a long table. The air here was thick with the scent of oil paint and something sweet, like honey. Sarah gestured to an alcove by a window. "Right there would be perfect." "Thank you so much, Jacob. It's even more stunning in person." She ran a hand over the smooth lid. "The carving. It tells a story, doesn't it? The birds, the willow branches. My fiancé will love it." Fiancé. The word hung in the air, a small, invisible weight. Jacob placed the chest down carefully, adjusting it until it was perfectly aligned. He straightened up, feeling an unexpected pang. He watched her for a moment, her fingers tracing the delicate lines of a carved bird. She seemed to glow in the sunlight filtering through the window, surrounded by the vivid colors of her art. "It is a strong piece," Jacob offered, his gaze lingering on the details of her studio, the freedom in the brushstrokes on a nearby canvas. "It will last." Sarah looked up, her hazel eyes sparkling. "I'm sure it will. Thank you again, Jacob. Your craftsmanship is truly exceptional." She reached into a pocket in her apron and pulled out a small folded wad of bills. "My father settled on the price, I believe." Jacob took the money, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting moment. A strange current, like static electricity, passed between them. He tucked the money into his vest pocket. "It was a pleasure," he said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. He offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and walked out, leaving the vibrant studio and its artistic occupant behind. The drive back to Harmony Creek felt different. The familiar field seemed duller, the uniformity of the farmhouses more pronounced. He replayed the encounter in his mind. The teal door, the smell of paint and flowers, the vibrant chaos of her studio, the melodic lilt of her voice, the brief touch of her fingers, and the word fiancé. He shook his head, trying to dislodge the images, the unexpected feelings. It was just a delivery, a business transaction. Yet, a tiny seed of something new, something unsettling and intriguing, had taken root. The world beyond the fence, it seemed, held more than just different colored clothes and faster boogies. It held vibrant hues and a different kind of song. And for the first time, Jacob felt a pull, a subtle questioning of the quiet rhythm of his own life. The fault in the finish. The late afternoon sun, already low, cast long shadows across the barnyard as Jacob approached his father. Thomas Stoltzfus was meticulously stacking split firewood, each piece placed with a precision that spoke of years of practice and an unwavering adherence to order. The rhythmic thunk of wood against wood punctuated the quiet. "Dad," Jacob began, his voice a little lower than usual, "there's a small matter with the Miller Hope chest." Thomas paused, his calloused hands resting on a log. He turned, his gaze steady and direct. "A matter? What sort of matter?" His tone was even, but Jacob felt the familiar tightening in his chest. A Stoltzfus's work was always flawless. A cosmetic flaw, Dade. A hairline fracture in the cherry veneer on the inner lip of the lid. Barely visible, but it could worsen with time. And it's not right. Not for a piece meant to last generations. Jacob offered the explanation, focusing on the quality, the integrity of their craft. Knowing this was the language his father understood, he omitted any mention of Sarah's vibrant eyes or the unsettling pull he'd felt. Thomas squinted, considering. "A fracture? Are you certain?" He stepped closer, examining Jacob's face for any hint of evasion. "You inspected it thoroughly before delivery, did you not?" "Yeah, Dade. But it was subtle. The light in the studio, it made it more apparent. I believe a minor touch-up, perhaps a thin inlay of matching wood, could secure it properly. It would be a disservice to Mrs. Miller not to rectify it." Jacob held his father's gaze, willing him to see the necessity, not the inconvenience. A long moment passed, punctuated by the distant lowing of a cow. Finally, Thomas nodded slowly. "A Stoltzfus's work is his word. If there is a flaw, it must be mended. Go tomorrow morning. See to it." He turned back to his wood, the incident seemingly closed. Jacob felt a tremor of relief, quickly followed by a strange, unsettling anticipation. The next morning, the air crisp and clear, Jacob found himself once more turning off the familiar paved road onto the gravel lane leading to Sarah Miller's studio. The vibrant splash of color from her garden seemed even brighter under the morning sun. He knocked, a different kind of nervousness fluttering in his stomach this time. Sarah opened the door, a smudge of paint on her cheek, her dark hair pulled back in a loose, artistic knot. She wore a paint-splattered denim apron over a soft, flowing tunic. Her eyes, a startling cerulean, widened slightly in surprise, then softened into a curious smile. "Jacob? Back so soon?" "Good morning, Mrs. Miller. Jacob Stoltzfus. I apologize for the intrusion, but I found a small imperfection in the hope chest. A hairline fracture near the lid's inner edge. I felt it needed immediate attention. He gestured vaguely, feeling a slight flush creep up his neck. Oh? Sarah's brows furrowed in concern, and she led him into the studio, the scent of turpentine and something floral filling the air. I hadn't noticed anything. Inside, the studio was a riot of controlled chaos. Canvases of varying sizes leaned against walls, depicting swirling landscapes and abstract forms that seemed to hum with energy. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and casting a warm glow on a half-finished painting on an easel. Jacob knelt beside the hope chest, opening the lid carefully. He pointed to the almost invisible line in the cherry wood. Here, it's a very fine line, but over time, with the wood expanding and contracting, it could become more pronounced. Sarah knelt beside him, her proximity sending a subtle tremor through him. She traced the line with a gentle fingertip. You have an incredible eye, Jacob. I truly wouldn't have seen that. She looked up at him, her gaze direct. What will you do? I brought some tools. A fine chisel, some matching cherry and hide glue. I can inlay a thin strip almost imperceptible to stabilize it. He began to lay out his tools on a clean cloth he'd brought. As he worked, meticulously measuring and cutting, Sarah watched, fascinated. It's like surgery, she murmured. So precise, so much patience. It's about respect for the material, Jacob replied, not looking up, and for the piece's purpose. A hope chest holds dreams. It should be built to last. Dreams? Yes, Sarah said softly, her voice thoughtful. That's what I try to capture in my art. The ephemeral, the intangible, to give it form, even for a moment. She gestured to a canvas depicting a storm-tossed sea, rendered in swirling blues and greys. It's a different kind of craftsmanship, but the intent, to create something lasting, something beautiful, it feels similar. Jacob paused, a sliver of cherry held delicately in his fingers. He looked at the painting, truly seeing it this time. The raw emotion, the energy, it was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. I see what you mean. The texture in the paint, it's almost like the grain of the wood. Alive. Sarah smiled, a genuine, open smile that reached her eyes. You understand, don't you? Not many do. Most people just see a picture. They fell into an easy conversation as Jacob worked, discussing the nuances of color and texture, the way light played on different surfaces, the challenge of translating an inner vision into a tangible form. Jacob spoke of the subtle variations in wood grain, the way a piece of maple could reflect light differently than walnut, the stories he imagined living within the sturdy furniture he crafted. Sarah spoke of the way light shifted on a canvas, the emotion conveyed by a brushstroke, the struggle and triumph of bringing a scene to life. Hours seemed to melt away. When Jacob finally stepped back, the repair was indeed almost invisible, a testament to his skill. He felt a profound satisfaction, not just from the flawless work, but from the unexpected connection. It's perfect, Sarah breathed, running her hand over the smoothed wood. Thank you, Jacob, truly. Jacob gathered his tools, a strange lightness in his chest. It was my pleasure, Mrs. Miller. He almost added Sarah, but caught himself. The scent of paint and wildflowers, the vibrant art, her open face. It all pressed against the edges of his ordered world. As he walked back to his buggy, the sun now high, the image of Sarah's studio and their shared conversation lingered. The quiet familiarity of his home felt a little different, a little less complete. The fault, he realized, wasn't just in the finish of the wood, but in the growing fissure within his own heart. Whispers of the heart cob's mallet usually struck the chisel with a comforting cadence, a steadying pulse for his thoughts, mirroring the ordered world of his community. But today, the sound grated, a discordant beat against the rising tempest within. A sliver of cedar, meant for precision, splintered unexpectedly under his hand, a sharp sting on his thumb. He scowled at the ruined piece. Sarah Miller's laughter, light and unforced, echoed in his mind, shattering the workshop's accustomed quiet. Her eyes, an astonishing blue, had held a lingering warmth, an unspoken understanding that now threatened the very foundation of his carefully built reality. He tried to reclaim his focus, picking up another piece of wood, its grain silken beneath his calloused fingers. Vanity, his father would have scoffed, watching him admire the maple's swirling patterns. But it wasn't vanity he felt, not anymore. It was appreciation. The way Sarah had appreciated the intricate dovetails of the hope chest, the way she had truly seen the beauty in his craft. It was a shared language he hadn't known he yearned for. The scent of sawdust, usually a balm, now seemed to carry a faint, unfamiliar note. The subtle, floral fragrance of her studio, clinging stubbornly to his clothes, to his very skin. He found his fingers tracing the wood's lines, not with a craftsman's practiced intent, but with dreamy abstraction. His mind replaying their conversation, her gestures, the way sunlight had illuminated her auburn hair. Days blurred into a week, each dawn bringing a fresh tide of internal tumult. Jacob's usual meticulousness wavered. He measured twice, cut once, yet still found himself correcting errors, a true rarity for him. His mother noted his abstracted air, his subdued responses at supper. "You seem to carry a heavy burden, son," she observed one evening, her kind eyes searching his face. He simply nodded, unable to articulate the strange, exhilarating ache in his chest. How could he explain that the burden was also a lightness, a terrifying flicker of something new? Meanwhile, Sarah found herself drawn to the periphery of Amish territory. A fresh canvas lay abandoned in her studio, its stark whiteness mocking her inability to concentrate. She rationalized a need for a specific pigment from the town's art supply store, a shade easily ordered online. Her drive took her past the Stoltzfus farm, a route she wouldn't ordinarily choose. Her heart gave a little flutter as she passed the familiar red barn, but the workshop door was shut. She drove on, feigning nonchalance, though a pang of disappointment tightened her chest. The next day, an inexplicable craving for fresh-baked bread from the Amish market pulled her in the same direction. She parked her car further down the road than usual, ostensibly to admire the rolling hills. Her gaze, however, kept drifting towards the Stoltzfus property. A horse-drawn buggy rumbled past, an older Amish couple nodding politely. Sarah offered a small hesitant wave, feeling like an interloper. Jacob was nowhere in sight. Jacob, meanwhile, knelt beside his bed, the worn rosary beads cool against his fingers. He closed his eyes, striving to clear his mind, to find solace in prayer's familiar rhythm. "Dear Lord, guide my heart." But Sarah's face, vibrant and clear, imposed itself over images of saints and scripture. He saw her smile, heard her gentle voice, felt the phantom warmth of her gaze. Guilt, sharp and cold, pierced through him. These burgeoning desires were not of God's will, not for an Amish man. He was straying, drifting from the path laid out for him since birth. He prayed for strength, for clarity, for the feelings to simply vanish, to return to the ordered simplicity of his former existence. He prayed until his knees ached, until his voice was a raw whisper. But when he finally rose, The quiet of his room felt heavier, the air still thick with her presence. The peace he sought remained elusive, replaced by a growing sense of unease. His heart, once a steadfast instrument of duty and faith, now beat with a confusing, insistent rhythm, whispering a name he knew he shouldn't speak. Stolen moments and shared secrets. The borrowed phone, a sleek black rectangle alien in his calloused hand, felt like a live thing, thrumming with forbidden possibility. Jacob's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet hum of the Stoltzfus barn where he'd retreated under the guise of an evening check. He fumbled with the smooth buttons, the unfamiliar light of the screen, a beacon in the encroaching dusk. Sarah's number, scrawled on a scrap of paper he kept hidden beneath his mattress, was etched into his memory. Each digit he pressed felt like a step further away from the familiar, a deliberate stride into an unknown landscape. The ringing on the other end was a shrill, insistent sound in the quiet barn. He held his breath, half expecting his father to materialize, demanding an explanation. Then, a soft, "Hello?" "Sarah." His voice was a strained whisper, barely audible even to himself. A pause. Then her voice, clear and melodious, a balm to his frayed nerves. "Jacob, is that really you?" Relief washed over him, a warm wave chasing away the icy dread. Their conversations began tentatively, fragments snatched from the edge of night. He'd wait until the house was dark, the rhythmic snores of his brothers a comforting blanket of sound, before slipping out. The barn, cold and vast, became his confessional. The horses, drowsy and indifferent, were his silent witnesses. He learned to speak into the phone, not directly at it, the small device feeling less like a foreign object and more like a conduit to a world he was only just beginning to imagine. "What are your dreams, Jacob?" she asked one night, her voice a soft murmur against the rush of his own breathing. He considered the question, staring out at the sliver of moon hanging low in the sky. His dreams, until recently, had been simple: a sturdy barn, a thriving farm, a devoted wife, children with bright, curious eyes. Now, a different image flickered. Sarah, her laugh echoing in a sunlit room, her hands covered in paint, a shared life he couldn't quite articulate. I just want to build things that last," he finally offered, the words feeling inadequate. "I know," she replied, her understanding a comfort, like a connection that withstands time, even if it's unconventional. He told her about the intricate joinery in a new dresser, the way the grain of the wood spoke to him. She described the play of light on a canvas, the challenge of capturing a fleeting emotion. They spoke of the quiet beauty of his world, the vibrant chaos of hers. He confessed his fear of disappointing his family, of straying from the path laid out for him. She admitted to a restlessness she couldn't explain, a persistent pull towards something she hadn't known was missing. Each call stretched longer than the last, their hours melting away like ice in spring. The phone grew warm against his ear, a tangible connection across the miles and the cultural chasm. He found himself laughing more freely than he ever had, sharing thoughts he'd never dared voice aloud. The weight of his world, usually so heavy, felt lighter when he spoke with her. But the lightened spirit came at a cost. The guilt gnawed at him, a persistent dull ache. Every creak of the floorboards in the house, every rustle in the barn, sent a jolt of panic through him. He'd snapped the phone shut, his heart hammering, imagining his father's stern gaze, his mother's heartbroken sigh. He started looking over his shoulder even in broad daylight, a constant vigilance that left him drained. The joy of their conversations was always shadowed by the fear of discovery, the knowledge that each stolen moment was a betrayal of everything he had ever known. His prayers grew more fervent, a desperate plea for guidance, for strength to resist, even as his fingers instinctively reached for the hidden phone, drawn to the forbidden rhythm of Sarah's voice. The looming shadow of doubt. The borrowed phone felt heavy in Jacob's palm, a small black rectangle that hummed with a world he barely understood. He stood by the barn door, the cool evening air carrying the scent of damp earth and hay, a familiar comfort that now felt laced with unease. Sarah's voice, clear and direct, cut through the chirping crickets. "Jacob, what are we doing?" He gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles white. "What do you mean, Sarah?" The question felt rhetorical, a hollow echo of his own gnawing uncertainty. "I mean us. This, the calls, the way we talk." Her voice softened, a tremor underlying her usual confidence. "Are you going to stay in Harmony Creek? Marry an Amish woman? Live out your days exactly as your father and his father did?" The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant lowing of a cow. He thought of the intricate dovetailed joints, the smooth curve of a hand-planed chair leg. He thought of Sarah's laugh, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, the scent of turpentine and something uniquely her own. It's what's expected of me," he finally managed, the words tasting like ash. "Expected or desired?" she pressed, her tone unwavering. "Because there's a difference, Jacob, and I deserve to know where I stand, where you stand." A cold knot tightened in his stomach. He pictured the disapproving gaze of Elder Lehman, the quiet disappointment of his mother. He pictured his own future, a path laid out since birth, now fractured by a question he couldn't answer. I don't know," he admitted, the admission a raw wound. The truth, however painful, felt like a small release. He heard a sigh on the other end, a sound that spoke of both frustration and understanding. He hung up feeling more adrift than ever, the phone's warmth fading, leaving only the chill of his own indecision. The next morning, the air in the kitchen felt heavier than usual. Jacob picked at his oatmeal, the familiar taste bland on his tongue. His mother, Mary, moved with her usual quiet grace, placing a fresh loaf of rye bread on the table. She sat beside him, her gaze gentle but perceptive. "You've been quieter than a winter stream, Jacob. Is something troubling you?" He looked up, meeting her soft brown eyes. Her concern was genuine, a warm embrace he both craved and feared. "Just much on my mind, ma'am," he mumbled, trying to sound nonchalant, but his voice cracked slightly. She reached across the table, her calloused hand briefly covering his. "Your heart is usually as open as a summer field. Don't let shadows gather where the sun should shine." Her words, simple and profound, pricked at his conscience, making the weight of his secret even heavier. He offered a weak smile, unable to meet her gaze for long, the unspoken words hanging between them like morning mist. Later that week, while delivering a custom-made rocking chair to the Miller farm, a necessary business transaction he now dreaded and yearned for in equal measure, Jacob overheard snippets of conversation from the passing buggies and wagons in Harmony Creek, women gathered by the general store, their bonnets bobbing, their voices lowered. "Young Stoltzfus boy," one whispered, her eyes darting towards him, "seems changed." Another added, "Heard he's been spending a good deal of time with that English artist. Sarah Miller, isn't it?" A chill snaked down Jacob's spine. The words weren't accusatory, not yet, but the collective hum of curiosity was unmistakable. The community, usually a comforting embrace, now felt like 1,000 watchful eyes, each one a tiny pinprick of scrutiny. He felt the subtle shift in how some men nodded to him, their greetings less jovial, more assessing. Even Thomas, usually quick with a joke, offered only a curt, "Good day, Jacob," before turning back to his work with a piece of lumber. The unspoken questions were a palpable presence, a looming shadow that threatened to engulf him, making his breath catch in his throat. He felt exposed, his careful facade of normalcy crumbling under the weight of whispered speculation. The freedom of his secret calls now felt like a dangerous indulgence, a thread unraveling his very existence in Harmony Creek. A brother's warning. The scent of sawdust and fresh-cut pine typically brought Jacob a profound sense of peace. Today, it felt like a shroud. He was sanding a tabletop, the rhythmic scrape of sandpaper against wood, usually a meditative exercise. But his mind kept drifting, replaying Sarah's laugh, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. His movements were less precise, his focus fractured. Jacob. The voice, deep and unyielding, cut through the workshop's hum. Jacob's stomach tightened. He knew that tone. Brother Levi Fisher, his elder brother, and a man whose very presence commanded respect, stood silhouetted in the doorway, hands clasped behind his back. The late afternoon sun, usually a warm glow, seemed to cast long, accusatory shadows. "Brother Levi," Jacob said, setting down the sander. His voice felt thin and reedy. Levi stepped closer, his gaze sweeping over the unfinished work, then settling on Jacob with an intensity that made Jacob want to look away. "Your mind is not on your craft, brother." It wasn't a question. "The work here suffers. And worse, your spirit seems unsettled." Jacob swallowed hard. "I am well, Brother Levi." The lie felt like sandpaper in his throat. Levi's stern expression softened imperceptibly, a paternal concern flickering in his eyes. "Our mother speaks of your changed ways. The community whispers. A man's reputation, Jacob, is like a fine piece of joinery. Once damaged, it is near impossible to make whole again." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "You are a Stoltzfus. Our name carries weight. You are expected to uphold the traditions, to prepare for your place as a husband and a pillar of this community." The weight of Levi's words pressed down on Jacob, a physical burden. He saw his mother's worried face, the expectant glances of the elders, the unwavering path laid out for him since birth. His future, once so clear, now seemed obscured by a shimmering, forbidden mirage. "I understand my duties," Jacob finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. He felt the immense pressure of generations of tradition, the silent sacrifices made for the preservation of their way of life. To deviate was not merely a personal choice, it was a betrayal of everything. Levi placed a heavy hand on Jacob's shoulder. "Remember the harvest, Jacob. Each man has his row to hoe, his contribution to make. Do not let distractions pull you from the path the Lord has set for you." With a final, meaningful look, Levi turned and walked away, leaving Jacob alone amidst the lingering scent of pine and the suffocating weight of his elder brother's warning. Later that evening, as dusk bled into night, Jacob found Daniel Weaver at the edge of the cornfield, checking the irrigation lines. Daniel, ever the silent observer, didn't need an explanation. The tension radiating from Jacob was palpable. "Levi spoke to you?" Daniel's voice was low, empathetic, a quiet understanding in his eyes. Jacob nodded, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. "He spoke of duties, of reputation, of a path I must follow." Daniel leaned against a wooden post, his own hands calloused from years of farm work. "He speaks true, Jacob. Our lives here are not our own, not entirely. We are part of something larger. It's a comfort mostly, a burden sometimes. He kicked at a loose clod of earth. The whispers grow louder. They speak of the Englishwoman, of your visits to her workshop. Jacob flinched. The casualness with which Daniel mentioned Sarah's name, the way it hung in the air, felt like an accusation. It is business, Jacob insisted, though even to his own ears it sounded weak. Daniel just looked at him, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. The community expects you to marry within the faith, to build your home here, to raise your children as we all were raised. He paused, then added, his voice softer, "It is what your parents expect, what my parents expect of me. It is the way of things." The words were not a judgment, but a reinforcement of the inescapable reality. Daniel, his steadfast friend, was not condemning him, but simply reflecting the undeniable truth of their world. Jacob felt a profound loneliness settle over him, a cold dread that no amount of prayer or toil could dispel. The path ahead, once so clear, now forked into two impossible directions, and he stood trembling at the precipice, caught between the demands of his world and the burgeoning rhythm of his own heart. A life imagined, a love confessed. The scent of turpentine and linseed oil usually soothed Sarah, a familiar balm that quieted the world. Tonight, it felt like a cage, the studio air thick with unspoken thoughts. She watched Jacob across the room, his strong hands idly tracing the grain of a discarded piece of cherry wood. His presence, a quiet anchor in her often turbulent artistic world, had become an insistent hum beneath her skin. The words, long simmering, finally spilled out. "Jacob," she began, her voice a little unsteady, "I'm falling in love with you." He looked up, his blue eyes wide, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. Sarah took a deep breath, the confession liberating and terrifying all at once. "I know this is different for you, for both of us, but I can't stop thinking about a life with you. A life where we wake up together, not just in this studio, but in our own home. A place where you could build us furniture, pieces that tell our story, and I could paint the light as it falls across them every morning." She moved closer, her gaze intense, pleading. "Imagine it, Jacob. Weekends spent exploring forgotten trails or finding antique treasures at market. Evenings filled with quiet conversation. Or the sound of your hammer, your saw, creating something beautiful while I sketch by your side. We could travel, see parts of the world you've only ever heard whispers about. The ocean, vast and wild, or mountains that scrape the sky. Our children, Jacob," she continued, her voice softening, "they wouldn't be bound by fences or rules that don't make sense to their own hearts. They'd know the joy of honest work and the freedom of choice. We could build a life, a real life, that's ours, completely ours, a life where your spirit isn't confined, where your craft can truly soar." Jacob stood motionless, her words painting vivid pictures in his mind, each stroke both exhilarating and terrifying. He saw the ocean, felt the salt spray on his face, heard the laughter of children unfettered by plain dress. He saw Sarah, her eyes bright with a future he hadn't dared to dream. The vision was intoxicating, a vibrant counterpoint to the quiet, prescribed existence he'd always known. But with it came a chilling wind of fear, the cold reality of what such a life would demand he forsake. His family, his community, his very identity. That night, sleep became a distant memory. Jacob lay on his straw mattress, the familiar sounds of the farmhouse, a backdrop to the tumultuous storm within him. Sarah's voice echoed, each imagined detail of their shared future warring with Levi's stern reprimand, Daniel's gentle reminder of duty. He saw the intricate patterns of the quilts his mother painstakingly stitched, the sturdy barns his father helped raise, the solemn faces of his community gathered for Sunday service. Could he truly walk away from all of it? From generations of tradition, from the only world he had ever known. The scent of freshly baked bread usually brought comfort, but at the Sunday gathering, it only served to heighten Jacob's sense of alienation. He sat on a hard bench, his shoulders aching with the tension that had gripped him for days. Every glance, every hushed conversation felt directed at him. He caught Miriam Stoltzfus's eye, her usual benevolent smile replaced by a tight, discerning look. Young Hannah Fisher, who had always giggled shyly in his presence, now averted her gaze. He felt the weight of their expectations, the silent judgment, like a physical burden. He watched Daniel laughing with a group of young men, their easy camaraderie a stark contrast to the invisible wall that seemed to have sprung up around Jacob. He imagined Sarah, vibrant and uninhibited, standing out among the plain dresses and muted tones, her laughter ringing freely. The thought brought a wistful ache to his chest. He felt like an actor in a play he no longer understood, performing a role that felt increasingly foreign. The rhythm of their hymns, once a source of deep peace, now felt like a relentless drumbeat, marking time until a choice had to be made. He was adrift, caught between two worlds, and the current was pulling him in a direction he knew would splinter his very soul. The ultimatum. The familiar scent of sawdust and linseed oil, usually a comforting anchor, now felt like a shroud. Jacob stared at the unfinished maple dresser, his tools lying idle beside it. He hadn't touched it since Sunday. His hands, usually so steady, trembled with an unfamiliar tremor. A furtive knock at the workshop door startled him. It was Sarah. Her eyes, usually so bright with artistic fire, were clouded with worry. "Jacob, we can't keep doing this," she began, her voice a low, urgent whisper, barely audible above the distant clatter of a horse and buggy. She stepped further into the dim space, her presence a vibrant splash of color against the muted backdrop of his world. This sneaking around, it's tearing you apart, I can see it, and it's doing the same to me. She reached for his hand, her touch a jolt of electricity that both comforted and terrified him. "You looked like a ghost at meeting on Sunday. You can't live two lives, Jacob. It's impossible." Her gaze was unwavering, pleading. "You have to choose. You have to decide what you want. What we want." The weight of her words pressed down on him, suffocating. He wanted to tell her everything, to confess the yearning that pulsed beneath his placid exterior. But the words caught in his throat, tangled with fear and guilt. He squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of the impossible chasm between them. The thud of heavy boots on the workshop floor shattered the fragile moment. Thomas Stoltzfus stood framed in the doorway, his silhouette imposing, his face etched with a sternness Jacob knew all too well. Sarah, startled, quickly released Jacob's hand, her face paling. Thomas's gaze, sharp and penetrating, swept from Sarah to Jacob, then back again, lingering on Sarah with an unmistakable disapproval. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. "Sarah," Thomas said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual warmth, "I believe you have mistaken the path to the main house." It was a dismissal, cold and absolute. Sarah's shoulders slumped. She glanced at Jacob, a silent plea in her eyes for him to intervene, to defend her. But Jacob remained frozen, his mind a chaotic whirl of fear and shame. With a final, sorrowful look, Sarah turned and slipped out of the workshop, leaving Jacob alone to face his father. "Jacob," Thomas began, his voice dropping to a low rumble that vibrated with suppressed anger. "What is the meaning of this? The rumors, they reach even to the fields. Talk of you, Jacob Stoltzfus, seen with an English woman, seen more than once. And now, I find her here, in our workshop, with you." He gestured around the space, as if her lingering scent was an affront to its sanctity. "What has gotten into you, son?" Jacob's breath hitched. His carefully constructed world of secrecy had crumbled. The truth, raw and exposed, was now unavoidable. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and stinging. He looked at his father, the man who had taught him every skill, every principle, every lesson of his life. And the shame was unbearable. "Dad," Jacob choked out, his voice thick with emotion. I love her." The words, once a whispered secret in his own heart, now echoed through the silent workshop, loud and defiant. Thomas's face, already rigid with displeasure, contorted further into a mask of pure fury. His jaw tightened, and a vein pulsed visibly in his temple. "Love," he spat, the word laced with venom. "Love? This worldliness, this temptation, you call it love? This woman, this English woman, she is a distraction, a snare set by the devil himself to pull you from the path of righteousness." His voice rose, resonating with a righteous indignation that made Jacob flinch. "You shame this family, Jacob. You shame our name, our faith, our community." He took a step closer, his eyes blazing. "You have a choice, Jacob. You choose her, and you walk away from everything, from your family, from your faith, from your place in this community. You will be shunned. You will be as if you never existed to us. Or," Thomas paused, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper, "you choose us. You end this folly. You put this woman behind you, and you return to the life the Lord has intended for you, the life we have built for you. There is no middle path. Jacob, no hiding in the shadows. Make your choice, now." The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and absolute, a death knell for the innocent boy Jacob once was. His heart ached, torn between the only life he had ever known and the vibrant, forbidden future Sarah offered. Before the congregation, the dawn air hung heavy, a silence Jacob had never known, far more oppressive than any winter's snowfall. He faced the small polished mirror, his reflection a gaunt stranger with eyes like shadowed hollows. His customary Sunday attire, the plain black suit and vest, felt less like clothing and more like a funereal shroud. Each button secured tightened a knot in his gut, every seam a visible line of expectation he felt utterly inadequate to meet. The familiar perfume of beeswax and aged wood, usually a balm, now clung like the scent of judgment. Thomas's words from the previous night reverberated, a harsh, insistent drumbeat. Choose. The ultimatum had flayed him bare, leaving him exposed to a chilling, uncertain wind. His gaze flickered to the small carved bird on his dresser, a long-ago gift from his mother, its wings perpetually poised for flight. He ached for that boundless freedom, even as a corrosive guilt gnawed at him for the desire. He walked toward the meeting house beneath a slate-colored sky, the path a well-worn track, yet strangely alien underfoot. Each distant clop of a buggy, every crunch of gravel beneath his sturdy boots magnified his growing dread. Daniel, a silent, steady anchor, walked beside him. Jacob risked a glance at his friend, whose face was a study in quiet concern. Daniel's presence offered a small measure of solace, a testament that not all eyes held outright condemnation. Inside, the meeting house was hushed, its benches filled with the familiar faces of his community. Today, however, those countenances were unreadable. A formidable wall of somber gazes. The elders occupied the front, their backs ramrod straight, their expressions grim. Brother Levi Fisher, his elder brother, sat among them, his usually gentle eyes now possessing a steely resolve that chilled Jacob to the core. Thomas sat slightly apart, his presence a heavy, brooding storm cloud. He avoided Jacob's eye, but the rigid set of his shoulders broadcast his shame and anger with stark clarity. Jacob settled onto the designated bench, the polished wood surprisingly cold beneath his palms. The air tasted of dust and unspoken accusations. Brother Levi rose, his voice, usually resonant with the cadences of a sermon, now clipped and formal. Jacob Stoltzfus, Levi began, his gaze unwavering. You stand before this congregation, before your family, and before God, accused of actions that have brought dishonor upon our community and broken the sacred vows of our faith. Jacob's breath hitched. He tried to swallow, but his throat was parched. He could feel the collective weight of every eye, every silent prayer, every unspoken accusation. He saw Mrs. Muller, who had taught him his letters, her lips a thin, unyielding line. He saw young Samuel, his cousin, watching him with wide, unblinking curiosity. We have heard the reports, Levi continued, of your dealings with an Englishwoman, of your secret meetings, and of the affection you have allowed to grow for her. This is a path away from the Lord, Jacob, a path that threatens to lead you to eternal darkness. Levi paused, allowing the words to hang in the oppressive quiet, heavy as millstones. This congregation, in its love and concern for your soul, offers you one final chance. Repent, confess your transgressions, sever all ties with this Englishwoman, and recommit yourself fully to our ways, to our faith, to our community. Jacob's mind raced, a frantic blur of images. He saw Sarah's luminous smile, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke of her art, the feather-light touch of her hand on his. He recalled their shared laughter, the stolen moments of profound understanding, the exhilarating sensation of finally being truly seen. Could he simply erase her? Could he pretend those nascent feelings had never existed? He looked at Brother Levi, then at his father, whose face was etched with a pain Jacob himself had inflicted. He remembered Sunday morning chores, the earthy scent of fresh-cut hay, the simple satisfaction of a perfectly crafted wooden toy. He remembered Thomas teaching him to plane wood, his father's calloused hand guiding his own. These memories were a warm embrace, a powerful gravitational pull back to the life he'd always known, a life of belonging and immutable certainty. Yet then Sarah's face would reappear, superimposed over the familiar landscapes of his past, a vibrant splash of defiant color in a world of muted tones. The thought of never seeing her again, of never hearing her voice, twisted something vital inside him. It was a future unwritten, terrifying in its raw uncertainty, yet exhilarating in its boundless potential. Levi's voice cut through his reverie, softer now, but no less resolute. Jacob, the choice is yours. Choose wisely, for the consequences are eternal, both in this life and the next. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing in on Jacob from every side. His heart hammered against his ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. He could feel the frantic pulse throbbing in his temples. He was at a crossroads, two divergent paths stretching before him, each demanding a piece of his very soul. One was paved with tradition, with forgiveness, with the encompassing warmth of his community. The other, an unknown trail, plunged into a wilderness guided only by his forbidden love. He looked down at his clasped hands, the rough, familiar skin of his knuckles, the ingrained sawdust from countless hours in his workshop. His hands, which had once crafted only for his community, now yearned to shape a different, uncharted destiny. The air felt impossibly thin, his lungs struggling to draw breath. All eyes were on him, waiting. The decision, heavy and sharp-edged, rested solely on his shoulders. The choice. The air in the meeting house was thick with unspoken judgment, a palpable weight pressing down on Jacob. He stood before the assembled community, the elders solemn-faced on the raised platform, his father's rigid posture a stark sentinel beside Levi. His gaze drifted across the familiar faces, each etched with a mixture of sorrow, concern, and resolute expectation. He saw Daniel, his friend, whose eyes held a flicker of understanding, a silent plea for Jacob to choose the path of least resistance. He saw his mother, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her usually serene face etched with profound worry. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness. The scent of beeswax and old wood, usually comforting, now felt suffocating. For 26 years this world had been his anchor, his identity, his every breath. He had learned to turn wood on his father's lathe, to till the soil, to live by the rhythm of the seasons and the unwavering tenets of his faith. He understood the unspoken language of shared silence, the strength of collective endeavor, the profound peace of belonging. But then there was Sarah. Her laughter, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, had stirred something dormant within him. Her hands, stained with paint and clay, had shown him a different kind of creation, a different way of seeing the world. Her spirit, vibrant and free, had called to a part of him he hadn't known existed. The memories flooded him. The warmth of her hand in his, the shared smiles over a perfectly carved detail, the late-night whispers under a sky ablaze with stars. Each memory was a brushstroke, painting a future he hadn't dared to imagine. A future vibrant with color and light, but also terrifyingly unknown. The community offered certainty, a well-worn path through life, the comfort of knowing his place. Sarah offered a leap of faith into the unknown, a future he would have to carve out himself, with nothing but their shared love as his guide. The weight of his father's disappointment, Levi's condemnation, the collective sorrow of his people pressed in on him. He could choose repentance, a return to the fold, and the slow, arduous task of rebuilding trust. He could forsake Sarah, and perhaps with time, the ache in his heart would dull, replaced by the quiet resignation of duty, but the thought of a life without Sarah, a life where the vibrant hues she had brought into his world faded to a monotone, was a bleak prospect. It felt like a betrayal, not just of her, but of himself, of the man he was becoming. The choice was not merely between two people or two ways of life. It was a choice between two versions of Jacob. One, safe and familiar, shaped by tradition. The other, uncertain and daring, forged by love. He took a deep breath, the decision solidifying within him, a heavy stone settling into place. The silence stretched taut and expectant. He looked directly at Levi, then at his father, their faces unyielding. Then, his gaze swept over the community, lingering on Daniel, offering a silent farewell. I have made my choice. Jacob's voice, though quiet, resonated through the hushed room, stripped bare of its usual shyness. I choose Sarah. A collective gasp rippled through the room, a sound like dry leaves skittering across a bare floor. Thomas Stoltzfus's face, already stern, hardened into an expression of profound shock and sorrow, his jaw clenching. Levi's eyes, usually steady, flickered with a raw, undeniable anger. A young woman in the front row began to weep softly, burying her face in her hands. Daniel's shoulders sagged, a silent acknowledgement of the irreversible chasm that had just opened. The air grew colder, heavier, charged with the sudden, sharp shock of his words. Jacob felt an immediate, profound sense of isolation, a sudden severing from everything he had ever known. Yet, beneath the icy chill of rejection, a fragile warmth began to bloom in his chest, a flicker of hope for the uncertain path he had just chosen. The path away from here. A new horizon. The crisp morning air bit at Jacob's cheeks, a stark contrast to the warmth that had once enveloped him within Harmony Creek. He stood by the lane, a small duffel bag, its fabric worn but sturdy, a gift from his mother years ago, slung over his shoulder. The buggy, his father's, was already gone. A faint rattle of wheels fading into the distance, leaving behind only the silence of his expulsion. He didn't look back at the farmhouse, the barn, the meticulously kept fields. He couldn't. The ache in his chest was too profound, a hollow space where belonging used to reside. A battered pickup truck, its paint peeling like dry skin, rumbled into view. It wasn't a vehicle he recognized from the community, but the driver, a distant cousin from a less strict district who owed his father a favor, offered a brief, strained nod. Jacob climbed in, the passenger seat springy and unfamiliar. The door thudded shut, a final punctuation mark on his life in Harmony Creek. As the truck pulled away, the field slowly receding, he allowed himself a single, furtive glance in the rearview mirror. The simple, unadorned church house, the school, the neat rows of corn, they blurred into an indistinguishable green and white, becoming memories before his eyes. He felt a profound sense of loss, a severance so complete it left him breathless, yet intertwined with it was a fragile tendril of defiant hope. Miles away, Sarah paced her studio, the scent of turpentine and oil paints, usually a comforting balm, now a mere distraction. Her brush hovered over a half-finished canvas, a vibrant landscape that seemed utterly meaningless. Her phone, clutched in her hand, had remained silent since Jacob's cryptic message last night. I have chosen. She replayed his words, the weight of them settling heavy in her stomach. Had he chosen her, or had he chosen his world? The uncertainty gnawed at her, making her heart pound with a rhythm that was anything but artistic. She jumped when a familiar, albeit gravelly, engine sound broke the quiet afternoon. Dropping her brush, she dashed out, her heart leaping when she saw the pickup truck, and then Jacob, emerging from its cab. He looked different, subtly altered. His customary dark clothes seemed to hang a little looser. His hair, usually neatly brushed, had a slight disarray from the wind. There was a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, but beneath it, a flicker of something new. Resolve, perhaps, or a burgeoning freedom. Sarah ran to him, throwing her arms around him without a second thought. His embrace was immediate and strong, a lifeline in a turbulent sea. She felt the rigid lines of his chest, the familiar scent of wood smoke and clean linen, and a wave of profound relief washed over her, followed by a sharp pang of sorrow for what he had endured. Jacob, she whispered into his shoulder, her voice thick with emotion. He pulled back slightly, his gaze searching hers, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before etched on his face. Sarah, he replied, his voice a low rumble, heavy with unshed tears. I chose you. The words, simple and direct, were a balm to her anxieties. She reached up, her fingers tracing the faint lines of worry around his eyes. I know, she murmured, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "I know." The driver of the truck, after an awkward cough, offered Jacob a brusque handshake and a few quiet words. Jacob then turned back to Sarah, a hesitant smile gracing his lips. The world around them, her vibrant garden, the hum of distant traffic, the sheer openness of it all, seemed to press in. This was her world, the English world he had so often observed from a distance, and now he was in it, truly in it. He surveyed her cottage, the riot of colours in her flower beds, the quirky wind chimes tinkling gently. It was all so vivid, so loud, so utterly different from the muted tones of Harmony Creek. He shifted his duffel bag, a faint uncertainty clouding his eyes. "It's a lot," he said, his voice quiet, almost lost in the sudden rush of the wind through the trees. Sarah squeezed his hand. "It is," she agreed, her gaze softening. She knew the magnitude of what he had done, the chasm he had crossed. "But we'll figure it out. Together." He looked at her then, a fragile hope replacing the earlier weariness. The unknown stretched before them, a vast, untamed landscape. But for the first time, Jacob felt a flicker of excitement, a sense of boundless possibility. His past was a closed book, but the first page of their future, however daunting, was finally open. Building a life, bridging worlds. The persistent hum of the refrigerator, a sound Jacob still hadn't entirely internalized as benign, was the soundtrack to their mornings. Sarah, perched on a stool, her hands smudged with charcoal, would often offer a gentle explanation for the unfamiliar noises that punctuated their home. "That's just the ice maker," she'd say, pointing to a plastic bin filled with perfectly formed cubes, a stark contrast to the rough-hewn ice his community once harvested from frozen ponds. He learned to operate the microwave with careful precision, marveling at how a plate of leftovers could be transformed from cold to steaming in under a minute. The internet, a dizzying tapestry of information and images, remained largely a mystery, though he'd observed Sarah effortlessly navigating its currents, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. His hands, accustomed to the familiar weight of a hammer and the smooth grain of wood, found new purpose. Sarah's small cottage, while charming, had its quirks. A crooked shelf in the kitchen, a wobbly leg on an old coffee table, a stubbornly sticking door, all fell under Jacob's patient purview. He replaced the warped pine of the shelf with a sturdier oak, the scent of sawdust filling the air, a comforting aroma that grounded him in this new world. He fashioned a small, elegant stand for Sarah's art supplies, incorporating dovetail joints that spoke of his heritage, yet its sleek lines complemented her modern aesthetic. He even tackled the finicky faucet in the bathroom, dismantling it with practiced ease, the glint of steel tools a familiar comfort. He discovered a local lumberyard, its offerings vast and varied, a stark contrast to the limited supply of rough-cut timber he'd known. The owner, a grizzled man with kind eyes, quickly recognized Jacob's innate skill, offering him odd jobs, repairing a fence here, building a custom doghouse there. The work was different, less communal, but the satisfaction of creation remained. One crisp autumn evening, after a day spent transforming a cluttered corner of Sarah's studio into a functional storage unit, Jacob sat beside her on the porch swing. The air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant, almost imperceptible hum of traffic, sounds he was slowly learning to differentiate. Sarah leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, her breath a soft whisper against his neck. "It's beautiful, Jacob," she murmured, referring to the newly organized studio, but her tone suggested something deeper. He wrapped an arm around her, drawing her closer. The rhythm of the swing, a gentle sway, reminded him of simpler times, of evenings spent on his family's porch, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets. But this silence was different. It was filled with a quiet understanding, a shared breath. "It's different," he finally said, his voice soft. He still wrestled with the echoes of his past, the faces of his family, the silent judgment he imagined in their eyes. The guilt was a dull ache, always present, yet it no longer consumed him. Sarah had helped him build a new framework for his life, not erasing the old, but integrating it, finding strength in the very contrasts. "Good different," she prodded gently, her fingers tracing patterns on his arm. He turned his head, his gaze meeting hers in the fading light. Her eyes, usually so vibrant, held a soft, knowing warmth. "Good different," he confirmed, a genuine smile spreading across his face. He kissed her then, a slow, lingering kiss that tasted of autumn air and whispered promises. He felt the familiar press of her lips, the subtle curve of her smile against his. It was a kiss that spoke of belonging, of a future unfolding, piece by careful piece. He thought of the small wooden bird carved by his father that still sat on his bedside table, a silent sentinel from a life left behind. He hadn't forgotten. He never would. But now, beside Sarah, in this unfamiliar yet increasingly familiar world, he understood that building a new life didn't mean abandoning his essence. It meant expanding it, embracing new textures, new sounds, new loves. He was Jacob, the carpenter still, but he was also Jacob, the man who had chosen love, who was learning to navigate a wider, more vibrant world, with Sarah as his compass. The journey was far from over, but in that moment, in the gentle rhythm of the swing, he felt a profound sense of peace.